Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14, presented by Steaks. We're doing a new feature this morning. We're doing this on Tuesday morning, heading into week 7 of the college football season. We're doing SEC quarterback rankings. This is the first one we've done all year. Blake, we did a lot of time and research. We got a sheet, all the numbers in front of us. We've watched all these guys. We're ready to roll with our picks. And we are going with the guys that are basically the starters at this point. In other words, Haynes King over Max Johnson at A&M, Robbie Ashford over TJ Finley in the field at Auburn, AJ Swann over Mike Wright at Vandy, and so on. So we're just ranking one quarterback for each school. Obviously, this could change with injuries and everything, but let's start at number 14. It is Auburn's Robbie Ashford. There have been some good moments, but there's also been 5 total touchdowns and 9 turnovers. And by the way, we consider rushing yards and fumbles and things like that too. These are quarterback rankings and not passer ratings. And boy, the bottom 3 or 4 in this league right now, it's a little bit ugly. And sometimes you're seeing team success or failure follow that, Blake.
Yeah, I mean, look, when we go through the bottom 4, which, I mean, we can just go ahead and say it. Spencer Rattler's 13, Brady Cook's 12, Haynes King is 11. We'll talk about maybe some individual numbers with those guys. But, I mean, it's like the theme we've talked about all season, right? Is just these offenses specifically. These 4, when you talk about just kind of the ups and downs of the offenses and specifically, looking at the passing game and just having a lot of questions. I mean, we had some questions coming into the season with a lot of these teams at quarterback in terms of what their passing game would look like, and really has sort of played out that way. I think the Rattler one maybe a little bit more disappointing. I don't know if that's the right word, just in terms of the turnovers and those kind of things. I think that's the biggest thing probably that we did not expect. We kind of expected an offense that would be probably just progressively get better, but I think, and that's not to take anything away from them, but I think it's just looking at the numbers and sort of how glaring they are. That's probably the one for me that stands out of this group here of 11 through 14, just because we just didn't really know what to expect, right? Because you talk about all the hype he had, coming in and just trying to figure out what that South Carolina offense will look like. And they're coming off a great win at Kentucky, but at the same time, we look at these kind of individual numbers, and yeah, they're kind of glaring, especially with the turnovers.
Yeah, if Spencer Rattler's name were not Spencer Rattler, he'd be last. I defer a little bit to the fact that he has achieved before, but he's got 6 total touchdowns and 13 fumbles and interceptions, and hard to win that way, although Carolina is doing it anyway. But 6.4 yards per play, if you include rushes, that's one of the league low marks. Brady Cook has kind of been solid, I guess is a good word, but 7 touchdowns, 7 turnovers. Does run a little bit. That counts for something. And Haynes King is a bit of a wild card. He's only averaging 6.3 yards a play, which isn't great. 6 touchdowns and 7 turnovers. Haynes King's got some upside here, Blake, but we need to see better production.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, the guy who started the season and Max Johnson comes in and it felt like, kind of got a little bit of a boost there, I think, when he came in offensively, but still it's just kind of, again, we're not saying anything we haven't already said about A&M. I mean, it's everyone kind of knows where they are at this point. But yeah, I mean, again, I it's interesting because like switching a lot of these guys around in this tier here, I don't really know, kind of some of the separators. I know you said Chris, you're the stats guy. I love looking at all these stats because I'm like, I couldn't have come up with some of this stuff, but it is kind of interesting to see kind of what separates guys like this that maybe are in this range. And for A&M, like you said, it's just, I mean, they just kind of are where they are right now offensively. So
Yeah, this is kind of a tiered system. I think that the 4 we just mentioned are certainly, I think, clearly in their own tier. The next guy probably in a tier by himself. Before we get to that, big games coming up in the league this week to add some excitement. We at Southeastern 14 went ahead and made some predictions in the Stakes app. Want to hear from you guys if you agree or disagree with our takes. So go to playwithstakes.com. That's STAKES /14. Sign up for Stakes. place your predictions with if you are for or against our predictions. If you use the invite code Southeastern14 when you sign up, you'll get a double welcome bonus. Stakes always free to play. It's not a betting app. It's just a gaming app. It's have some fun, win some stuff, and brag when you beat us. So go to stakes.com and help out our title sponsors. Okay, actually, that's playwithstakes.com/14. I think this guy's a tier on his own. Anthony Richardson, you have seen the good, you have seen the bad. Ironically, that sort of balances out. He's accounted for 10 touchdowns and also 10 turnovers. But he's also accounted for 7.6 yards per touch, which is higher than several guys in front of him. I think you take the good and the bad of Anthony Richardson, you kind of put him here by yourself, and you wonder how this movie ends this year, because I think it could go in a lot of different directions.
Yeah, and I know that's gonna kind of maybe be jarring for some people to see, wow, how is he here? But when you really do look at the numbers, like it's understandable, I think, like you said, with the turnover specifically, right? Because he's second to Rattler, I guess, in the SEC in terms of the quarterbacks we're looking at with turnovers. Um, and yeah, it's just, I mean, we've talked about it, right? It's like you go all the way back to that first game against Utah, and doesn't throw a touchdown, but 3 rushing touchdowns, like goes over 106 yards or 100 yards there, rush for 106. They had that big win, but then it's just beyond that, it's kind of been a mixed bag at times. And I think too, it's a matter of, you know, I mean, he goes 8 of 14 for 66 yards against Missouri. They still win the game. Um, only has to go 8 of 10 for 240 yards against Eastern Washington, but it's like, what do we take away from that? Had 1 rush for 45 yards. Um, yeah, it is. It's just kind of a fascinating case. That's why I think it's interesting, like you said, that he's here in the spot, because I just don't know what else you kind of do when you actually look at the numbers and kind of dive a bit more into him. The upside is high enough for him to be a top 5 quarterback in the league. It's just, there has been some inconsistency, and like you said, that turnover number is just kind of, it really stands out when you kind of compare him maybe to some of the other quarterbacks we're going to talk about. So,
okay, number 9, Vanderbilt's AJ Swann, and that may surprise some people. AJ Swann, though, is counted for 8 touchdowns and 1 turnover. And keep in mind, he didn't play much in Vanderbilt's 2 easiest games. So the stat padding games, AJ Swann was not a part of. He is in the top 10 in pass efficiency, is 151.5. That's higher than a couple of guys in front of him. Vanderbilt's actually got some weapons this year, but the talent around him is not what it is at most of the other schools in the SEC. And if you've watched this kid, he's got a big-time arm. He can get balls into windows. He does a lot of good stuff. And that's going to be a kid that if you've not watched him, that may not be worth watching at Vanderbilt right now. But it's mostly on that offensive side of the ball. And he's got a lot of talent, Blake. I know you and I have both seen him, and we like him.
2 things here, because this is where we've kind of reached this point. Number 1, this is not a ranking of future NFL quarterbacks.
Although, you know what, if it was, AJ
right,
Swann, I think, would be higher.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I'm not making that example for Swan. I'm making that example for what we're going to talk about with other guys. We are ranking these based on what we've seen this season. We are not projecting out to the NFL draft. So let's keep that in mind here, because I know that's going to be brought up. Something else that stands out to me with AJ Swann, the second point I want to bring up: 0 interceptions, right? 0. But you got to go deeper than that. 0 interceptions. He's thrown 110 passes, and he's done that against 3 teams in the top 25, right? Ole Miss, Alabama, Wake Forest. 0 interceptions, 110 pass attempts. I think that's what, Chris, I find most just remarkable, because that is something that we know over the years at Vanderbilt. Turnovers have been a problem offensively at times. And I think to look at that and say, sure, are his numbers through the roof in some of these games? No. But the fact is, he's not the person that is, putting them in a position to lose the game. Like, he is the guy that is really keeping them, I think, at least keeping things interesting. Obviously, didn't do that against Bam and all that. But that's what I kind of find really interesting about his numbers is that you've got a freshman coming in. He's played 3 top 25 teams, throwing 110 passes, and he's yet to throw an interception. Maybe I'm putting the jinx on him this week going to Georgia, which a
Yeah,
lot of
it
quarterbacks
could fall apart quickly in
could do
Georgia,
that.
but
But so far, that's why I think it certainly is understandable why he would be ranked as high as he is right now.
yeah, he's got a big time arm. And the one turnover I saw this weekend, it was actually a lateral that his running back failed to go after, and it got charged to him, but probably should not have been. Anyway, number 8, and we had some debate on this. Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. The knock on Dart is he's got 6 turnovers against only 8 touchdowns. Now, he's also averaging 8.9 yards per snap. That's tied for second in the league. I liked what I saw of him last weekend. Everybody knows he's got big upside, was a very highly regarded player coming out of high school. I think you could easily move him up a couple of spots. And these next few, it gets murky. But we went with Jackson Dart at 8, and I think you could easily see Jackson Dart slide up 3 or 4 spots in the rankings before the year's over.
Well, listen, I'll just say it. I was kind of the one that pushed the guy that maybe we were going to put at number 8 into the number 7 spot, and that's Jayden Daniels. But like you said, I don't, Chris, it's one of those things where you can debate this all day, right? About maybe which guy deserves to be ahead of the other. I just think for some reason I wanted to kind of give the nod to Daniels here because I really, aside from that game against Auburn where they just, I don't know that there's just, I really like the aspect of, you talked about like the rushing ability and those kind of things too with Daniels. I don't know. Like I tend to give him the nod, but that's not really a knock on Dart. I just think maybe I've been more impressed with Daniels to this point, even though yes, they're coming off of a sort of shellacking against Tennessee, but I don't think that was his fault in terms of kind of where things stood on that. So yeah, 2 good quarterbacks here with these 2, and like you said, we got to place guys somewhere, and not really a knock on Jackson Dart either, but I think I would have Daniels ahead of him, so I think that's probably why we gave the nod here.
Well, there's a couple things here when you separate these guys. And on the downside, Daniels is only averaging 6.2 yards per snap if you include running and passing plays. But he's got 10 touchdowns to 3 turnovers, whereas Dart is 8 to 6. LSU's schedule's been a good bit more demanding so far than LSU's. And Daniels has also got a little bit of more history at Arizona State than Dart does. So when you're dealing with a smaller sample size, I think you maybe defer to some of that too.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And again, like we said, it's hard to once you get to this kind of range, and we're going to talk about the top 6 in a second, which I think is pretty. This top 6 is very fascinating, but I think it'd probably be hard to move these 2 guys up any further in terms of this. I think these were probably going to be your 7 and 8, just to depend on what order probably at that point. So
okay, in my mind, the next 4 you could put in different orders, and you could make a case for it. To me, I think there's a clear top 2, and
yeah,
probably a separator there that we'll get into shortly. But we're going to get yelled at for this one. We've got Will Levis at 6, which is maybe lower than his draft position. Let's keep in mind Levis's track record. It's still not incredibly long. I mean, he was a backup quarterback at Penn State 2 seasons ago. The knock on Levis has been turnovers. He's got 7 of them to 14 touchdowns he's accounted for. Everybody in front of him has got a better ratio. Yards per play, he's at 7.4, which is good. But there are 3 guys in front of him significantly better. He didn't come through in the clutch a couple of weeks ago, although I think that's probably more on his offensive line. And frankly, that's where, if we're being unfair to Will Levis, we have knocked his line all year. And I don't think the separation between 3 through 6 is great, but somebody had to go there. And in this case, it's Will Levis.
Yeah, I'm looking at this beautiful sheet of numbers here you put together.
There
are
are some really good quarterbacks on this list from here on.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like it is interesting to kind of look at him in this spot as I'm looking at this list you put together, and yeah, like it is one where you're like, man, you didn't really expect him to be there. But when you look at some of the guys ahead of him and you compare the numbers in a lot of these different categories, you can understand why maybe he sits in this spot right now. Um, and so yeah, it's interesting. Like, because look, we got KJ Jefferson at 5. Let's just go ahead and talk. We're going to talk through this, Chris. Will Rogers is at 4. Stetson Bennett is at 3. So you're talking about these 4 here, and we all know who the top 2 are going to be. But I think it's interesting to kind of compare Levis's numbers to these 3 guys ahead of him that we do have in this range: Jefferson, Rogers, Bennett. Um, sounds like a law firm. Um, but you kind of look at this and it is something, and that's where I think again it's like accounting for the offensive line, the stuff that you've talked about, kind of with the offensive line issues. You have to take that into account, when you kind of look at the numbers too. But it is interesting to kind of look at this group of 4 and try to figure out how to really separate them apart. Although I know there's a couple of things you're going to point out that does kind of separate the guys who are a little bit higher on this list.
Well, I've always liked KJ Jefferson. He's got 13 touchdowns accounted for, 5 turnovers. I'm not sure he had more than 5 all year last year. Arkansas has played maybe the toughest schedule in the country. He's been hurt. I like Jefferson better than Levis coming into the year, and I haven't seen enough to move me off my spot yet. Both really good players. Look, if your quarterback is either KJ Jefferson or Will Levis, you're thrilled, right? We're getting into some really good quarterbacks. We said before the season, the group of quarterbacks in this league is as strong as we remember in a long, long time. Rodgers, we're going to get blowback on that, and I get it. Rodgers, and we look at rushing numbers too. And I think that's what people forget about Rodgers is there's some guys around him that are really mobile. KJ Jefferson has run for 312 yards. Rodgers is minus 60. And I know that's sack numbers, but the point is Jefferson gives you an asset with his feet. Levis does too, although Levis's rushing has gotten destroyed by his offensive line. He's at minus 52. Rodgers is he's also shown a tendency to fumble. He's had 4 this year. The completion percentage is out of this world, and I give him a lot of credit for that. But you look at the top 6, 6.9 yards per play. That's the lowest in our top 6. And in fact, there's a couple guys behind him that are higher. People are wanting, and that is not to knock Will Rogers. He's a great quarterback. We just have to separate some things here. That's how I did it with Stetson Bennett.
That's what I was about to ask.
Yards per play.
I was going to ask about
I don't think
Stetson
people
Bennett.
realize
Yeah.
that. And he was good last year per play too. Yeah.
This was going to be my question. Is I was going to ask you because Ian, you're the numbers guy, and I'm looking at this and my head spins sometimes. But the separator with Stetson Bennett as compared to a Will Rogers, a KJ Jefferson, throw Will Levis in there. That's kind of what I was kind of diving into when you looked at some of that, and that's what I was sort of curious about when you look at sort of when you just mentioned it, the 8.4, that was kind of a big standout number as compared to some of the others. So,
well, and he also won a national title last year.
well, true.
And it wasn't just his team taking him for ride. He made plays.
But for
and
this
I do account
season,
for that. Yeah,
I think I could understand some blowback on maybe having him this high. Initially, we had him very high because he looked really good earlier in the season. I think that we kind of talked about them a little bit the past several weeks at times where they have not looked as good. So I think that's an interesting one too. I think so.
yeah.
Always an interesting discussion.
You have to give a guy like when you're getting to tiebreakers, you have to account for stuff like that.
That's fair.
It can't just be numbers. As big of a numbers guy as I am, it's got to be more than that. Top 2, we go Hendon Hooker at 2, Bryce Young at 1. Again, I think the reigning Heisman winner stays there until he proves he's not that guy anymore. Young is accounted for 17 touchdowns against 3 turnovers. Hooker, and we talk about the interceptions. He never throws them. He does fumble. He's lost 3. Young, 8.9 yards a snap. Hooker, 9.0. Of course, Hooker has played a little bit more because Young missed last game against A&M, but I don't think anybody can yell at us for those 2 picks.
Well, here's the thing, Chris. What if Bryce Young's back this week? Hendon Hooker versus Bryce Young. Hooker gets the best. Do we swap them next week? I think there's a probably you have to do that if he outduels him this week, but we'll see. Look, it goes back to it, right? Like I hope both these guys. I hope Bryce Young plays because I hope it's get both these guys at full strength because these are the top two guys we have in our rankings, and that's not surprising at all. Um, it's just so fun to watch both of them lead their offenses. And we've talked about the numbers. We talk about how explosive Tennessee's offense is, but it's like sometimes you just forget. You're like, you just expect Alabama to do what they do. And like when you really dive into the numbers, sometimes you just forget how just truly ridiculously talented they are offensively. And it all
Yeah.
starts with Bryce Young. I think it's just sometimes we do overlook that. And I'm probably guilty of that too. It's like it's just an expectation at this point to not really even get so wowed by anything Alabama does. But you still have to appreciate it for what it is. And yeah, so I think that's why again I hope both guys. Well, I mean, we know Hendon Hooker's going to play. I hope Bryce Young plays because it would be kind of fun to just watch this duel between these two in Knoxville. So
Well, if you want to know how good each guy is, look at the drop off to when they play the guy behind them for both teams. I mean, you can say system quarterback at Tennessee. I don't buy it. I'm just saying, Josh Heupel's guys have put up some numbers, but the difference, you saw the difference a year ago when Tennessee went to Hendon Hooker over Joe Milton. And you've seen the difference, not that Jalen Milroe is a bad player, but the difference in offense with Bryce Young and Jalen Milroe is pretty noticeable. So I don't think anybody was really doubting Bryce Young's talent after winning the Heisman. But if you're going, well, every Alabama quarterback that sits in that chair is a Heisman contender, yeah, that's been true recently. But
you
you
still got to
saw
play
it's
the
not just
games,
plug
man.
and play.
You still
Right.
got to go out there and make the plays, and that's what Bryce Young has done. That's what Hendon Hooker has done. So we can have all that talk we want about, system quarterback and translating to the NFL and all this other stuff. But when you just watch these guys execute what they're supposed to do, it is a thing of beauty, whether you're talking about Bryce Young or Hendon Hooker. So,
And there's some good quarterbacks in this league. I mean,
oh yeah,
Anthony Richardson is 10 on our list. Flaws and all, you were seeing him as a potential top 10 pick before the now. Look, to be fair, those lists are silly this time of year. They're based on raw ability. A lot of times it's off projection and guys who haven't done much, and then they get on the field and they prove themselves not worthy. And some nights Richardson has done that, but it is a really good group of quarterbacks. It's been a lot of fun to watch, and it's going to be fun to see how these separate down the stretch.
yep. It's like you said. I mean, just take our top whatever, even top 10, right? Like, and you just kind of look at the capabilities and that's not to knock the bottom guys. It's just like we said, we knew those were going to be a challenge. Try to figure out, the quarterback situation there in those particular teams, those four specifically, but the top 10, I mean, the upside and just I mean, even like we said, even a guy like AJ Swann, who relatively, unknown in terms of from an SEC standpoint coming into the season. And now you kind of look at what he's done. And sure, I mean, Vanderbilt's still the team we have at the bottom of our actual power rankings. But in terms of individual play, I mean, there's just been so many big plays from these quarterbacks this season in this league. And like you said, and we know there will be debate about this guy should be higher, this guy should be lower. But that's the fun of it. Is that you absolutely can debate it because there's not a ton that separates a lot of these guys. Again, I think aside from the top two, I think the top two are as clear as can be. And then I think, you talk about having those discussions between the Bennetts and the Rogers, Jefferson, Levis, Daniels, all those guys. That's where it really gets kind of fun to look at those. So,
Well, you say the top two are clear. Would you rule out somebody yelling at us for not having Stetson Bennett in there, given he won the national title a year ago,
yeah,
or
but I think
Levis based on draft stock?
we're doing our week 7 our
Yeah.
week 7 quarterback rankings as of week 7. We're not. I mean, I get the point of we have to bring in the fact that he won a national championship last season, and you can't just ignore it. But I also think there's something to what have we seen through 7 weeks, and
Yeah.
through 7 weeks, to me, I think there's a clear top two. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think even if you're a Georgia fan, you look at we were texting Chris like even that Missouri game, like there was some things Georgia offensively, they just didn't look good. And we said that stretch there we just didn't play as well. But he turns it on last week. What did he have? He had a long run last week. So
61 yards, I
maybe
think. Yeah.
maybe Stetson Bennett getting it turned back around. Although again, you got a national championship in your pocket. You don't have a lot to prove to your critics, and we're not exactly criticizing. We're just pointing out that to me, the top two have just been on another level to this point. And hey, there may be some people that think Will Rogers and others should be included in that. So
It's a beauty pageant inside the top 10.
yes, it
Are
is.
there any ugly girls in a beauty pageant?
Listen, there's a lot of good quarterbacks here, and
Yeah.
that's a good thing to have. So
Yeah. Well, it's been fun. It'll be fun to see how these sort out. We will have our Wednesday night live show. We're bringing basketball content. Of course, we previewed every game, getting a good number of views on those. So if you want to catch all our content, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Got a big announcement coming up too.
on
Big
our live
announcement
stream
coming up
Wednesday
Wednesday night.
nights, yeah, we're gonna make an announcement. So don't worry, we're not leaving for ESPN. But listen, ESPN, if you're listening, I'm not saying we're against it, but we're not leaving right now. So
I think we could go on the Ocho, don't you?
sure, I don't see why not. I think we'd be great for that. So
It'd be great on the Ocho. All right. Thanks for watching. Enough bad movie jokes, and we'll catch you again soon.